everybody, I'm back. And today we're doing another episode of Beauty and the Bibliophile. If you're new here, welcome to my channel and welcome to the Cute Life. I'm your cult leader, Leah. Today we are doing another episode of Beauty and the Bibliophile where I do my makeup and I tell you about the latest book that I've read. Today's book is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I love this book. This man is one of the most, I don't know what word to use to describe him, but he just knows what's going on. Like, he just seems to know what's going on in your head, in his own head. Somehow he was able to go through all these challenging things and come out on top and just accomplish things that nobody has ever accomplished. So, if you want to know what kind of things he's accomplished, and if you need a little bit of encouragement in your life, if you need to hear that you can do it, you are capable of accomplishing anything that you want, you need to stick around and listen to my summary of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And then you can go out and get the book. So let's start. Okay, so Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And this came out in 2018. So David Goggins is a retired Navy SEAL. He has competed in marathons, triathlons, ultra triathlons, all the types of races you could ever think of. And he placed in the top 5 on a regular basis. He's a public speaker and he's shared his stories with companies, football teams, students. He had a very rough childhood. It was consumed with poverty, prejudice, physical abuse, but through hard work, mental toughness, and self-discipline, Goggins was able to transform himself from a depressed, overweight person without a future into a U.S. Armed Forces icon and one of the world's top endurance athletes. He's the only man in history to complete training for the Navy SEALs, Army Ranger, and Air Force Tactical Air Controller. I don't know what most of those things are, but they, I'm sure, are extremely impressive. So in this book, he shares his life story, and he also shows the path that he followed, that anybody can follow to push past pain, fear, and reach their full potential. I really need a haircut. I can't. Okay, so I'm gonna let my skincare sit in for a few minutes while we continue with the book. So this book starts with giving you your orders. The situation: you are in danger of living a life so comfortable and soft that you will die without ever realizing your true potential. Your mission is to unshackle your mind. You need to ditch the victim's mentality and build an unbreakable foundation. The execution is to read this book cover to cover and to complete all 10 of the challenges and exercises that he puts at the end of each chapter. And I really liked these challenges and exercises. They're nothing crazy fancy, usually just writing down a few little things. And I think they are extremely helpful. So you're to do this and then repeat the exercises over and over and to really never stop. You don't stop when you're tired, you stop when you're done, when the mission has been completed. He says that no matter who you are, no matter where you've come from, how much money you have, what color your skin is, what gender you are, you're probably only operating at 40% of your actual potential. He says from the moment you were born, you became eligible to die, but you also became eligible to find your greatness and become a warrior. But it's up to you to equip yourself for the battle that's ahead. Only you can equip your mind, which is what it's going to take to live a life accomplishing things that most people think are outside of their capability. He says that whenever your body and your mind are driven to their max capacity, whatever's in front of you, whether it's racism, sexism, poverty, obesity, physical challenges, mental challenges, these become fuel for your fire and for your metamorphosis. So it's time to go to war with yourself. So in chapter 1, we learn about David's early life. So it starts when David is in first grade and he's describing the neighborhood that he lives in. He says that it's, the American dream type neighborhood. He said doctors and lawyers and, executives and football players all lived in his neighborhood. And his family was doing just as well as any of them. His mother was 17 years younger than his father, and David was the second child. So he describes a typical day. He says that around 5 p.m. they all get in the car and they drive to the Maston district, I think is how you pronounce it, in East Buffalo. Now this neighborhood was very different than the neighborhood that he lived in. It was mostly working class and pretty rough around the edges. Now his father had done pretty well for himself, and this is where he owned a roller rink and it had like a bar over it. So when they got to the roller rink around 5 o'clock, David, his brother, and his mother would all get to work. David, being the younger one, he organized the skates. His older brother manned the concession stand. They would polish the rink floor and just get everything ready for opening the rink. The rink opened at 7. So at 6, David's mother would have the boys come into the back office and she would make them dinner there. And they had to eat fast because the doors were opening soon. And his father would go into another office where he would, do paperwork and make calls and stuff. Then at 7, when they opened, his father would come out and he would man the DJ booth. And he also kept a really close eye on him and his brother and his mother, because if he didn't want them messing anything up or like stealing or, doing anything like that, because they would be in big trouble. Now, none of them got paid anything, not even their mother. Their mother had like no money of her own. She didn't have a bank account. She didn't have credit cards in her name. The father was in charge of all of this. But of course, nobody knew any of this. So at 10 o'clock, the skate rink closed. Then him and his brother and his mother would have to get to work cleaning. They would have to clean the rink, they would have to clean the bathrooms, the concession stand, all that stuff, while his dad was upstairs at the bar. And just before midnight, his mom would come and get his brother and take them back into the back office and tuck them under a blanket on the sofa, and they would have to go to sleep while heavy bass from the funk music up above them in the bar was playing. Then their mother would go upstairs to work the bar. And it wasn't uncommon for her to walk in on their father sweet talking or hanging out with another woman. Now it turns out that David's father ran prostitutes across the Canadian border. Around midnight, the security guard would accompany their mother to make the night's deposit. And when they were out, he would usually try to convince her to leave this man, but she couldn't because she didn't have any independent means. She had no income and she couldn't leave her children with him. And she didn't even have, any communal rights to property or whatever because they never got married. He refused to marry her as a way to, again, keep her trapped, because then she would have no claim to anything. Then they would drive home around 6 a.m. The boys would go to bed, and then they would still have to get up in the morning to be at school. Now, obviously, this didn't make for the most ideal learning conditions, and David's grades suffered for it. Now, at this part, he goes on to describe some domestic abuse scenes that were not uncommon in his house, both towards the children and their mother. I'm not really going to go into that because it's a little too violent, but it became clear that if they didn't leave, somebody was going to die. So his mother started planning their escape, and they ended up in Brazil, Indiana at her parents' house, and they felt extremely relieved. They said that they felt like they escaped the devil himself. So they stayed with the grandparents for about 6 months, and then they were able to get into some public housing. And, you know, they were on welfare and food stamps, and it was rough because their mother was also trying to go to school at the same time, which cost money too. But she was hell-bent on changing their life. There were times when they didn't have food or electricity or gas. You know, the times they were dark. And David's brother, I guess, couldn't deal with it very well, so he ended up going back to his father. So then when David hit 3rd grade, he was struggling. He had developed a stutter because his thought-to-speech pattern was jammed up with all this anxiety and stress. And his teacher that year wasn't the most effective. She wasn't the type that would sit and try to help her most struggling students. She would get frustrated and would vent at him by yelling at him, which caused more stress. He said that school became just like a torture chamber for him. His teacher even discussed with his mother putting him in the special classes. And this really freaked David out because, you know, when you're in school, you all know what that means. It means that, you know, you're a hopeless case, and there's a stigma with that. But David came up with a plan, and he figured out how to get out of it and how to start doing better. He started cheating. Now, this placated his teachers and kept him from being ostracized even more than he was. He was one of the only African Americans in his school. And whenever you're the only of something, you know, you're gonna get teased, you're gonna get left behind, suspected of stuff, disregarded, bullied. And he said by this time he had gotten the message that he was born to fail. Now, when David was in the 4th grade, his mother met a man named Wilmoth. And he had a successful contracting business. And he brought a lot of stability to their family. And his mother really liked him and made her very happy. He said that, you know, she was back to being like her real self since having left their father. This also gave them a lot of hope for their future, that they weren't going to be, you know, stuck in poverty forever. And then shortly after Wilmoth and his mother decided that they were going to get married, Wilmoth was murdered in his own home. And this just sent David into a rage when he found out about this. And he punched the refrigerator and he left a dent in it. There goes their future, is what he thought. So they ended up moving to Indianapolis. They were going to move there when they got married. And so they decided to just go ahead with the plan and move there. And when they got there, his mother enrolled him in Cathedral High School, which is a college preparatory high school in the heart of the city. And when he started there, he was looking at a full slate of AP classes. Now at this school, he did the same thing he did at the last school. He just cheated and copied his way through the classes. and he was able to get onto the freshman basketball team. And this gave him a bit of a confidence boost, but nothing that he could build on because, I mean, he knew he had cheated to get to where he was, so that's not like real confidence. And the school cost his mother a lot of money. So after the first year, she had to pull him out because they couldn't afford it anymore. He ended up going to North Central High School. So when he got to this new school, he was used to prep school and he did not fit in at all. He was dorky and, you know, wore his pants like a normal person. But when he got there, he caught on really fast and he didn't want to stand out like a sore thumb. So he switched up his wardrobe and he started dressing, you know, like in the hip hop culture. And he started hanging out with the gangbangers and some of the delinquents. And when his mom found out about this, she immediately moved them back to Brazil, Indiana. But here he stuck out like a sore thumb too, because now he was the opposite of them. There he stood out because, you know, he wore his pants saggy and was like into hip hop and all this stuff, and most of the kids there weren't into that stuff yet. You know, he acted all cool and cocky, but he was really very insecure. And another thing about having to live in Brazil, Indiana, was he had to deal with a lot of small-minded people. One time when he was walking home from a party with his cousin who was there visiting him, a truck full of teenagers pulled up next to them and jumped out and pulled a gun on them and was calling them a bunch of racial slurs. And for some reason, he doesn't know why, they just got back in the truck and left. And he says that this was just one of the many incidences like this. And he went to his principal with these issues several times, but the principal, he was at a loss of what to do about it. And this fury just started churning inside of David, and he never really let it out, but it was eating him up on the inside because he didn't know how to deal with these kind of emotions in a healthy way. And what was he supposed to do? Fight everybody? He'd already been suspended from school 3 times for fighting, and he started going out of his way to become the type of stereotype that these types of people loathe the most. He started, you know, really sagging his pants. He souped up his truck so that your windows would rattle as he passed by. And everything he was doing was because of the opinions of somebody else. Everyone's opinions about him mattered to him. And that's a shallow way to live. He was full of pain and no purpose and had given up on any chance of success. But he did have one dream left. He wanted to join the Air Force. His grandfather had been in the Air Force for 37 years as a cook, and he had been very proud of his service. He even wore his dress uniforms to church on Sundays. And that level of pride really inspired David to join the Civil Air Patrol, which was a civilian's portion of the Air Force. And there you would learn about all the different jobs that were available in the Air Force. And he especially became fascinated with pararescue, the guys that jump out of the airplanes to rescue downed pilots. So one day a pararescue man came and spoke. His name was Scott Gierner, and he told them a story about one time when he was jumping and another jumper collided with him in the air and he went unconscious, and he hit the ground at over 100 miles per hour and bounced 3 times, and he died on the operating table twice, and the doctors had to bring him back to life. Now when he woke up, he was told that he would never make a full recovery and never would be a pararescue person again. But 18 months later, he defied the odds, made a full recovery, and was back at the job that he loved. Now, for years, David was obsessed with this story. He really resonated with his story of survival. David, you know, he had been through a lot. He had an abusive father. They lost Wilmoth. He had to endure, you know, racism, and he just really felt like he himself was falling out of control. Girner was living proof that you could transcend anything that didn't kill you. And from that moment on, David knew that he wanted to join the Air Force after graduation. But David had no clue about the emphasis that the military puts on education. He figured they'd take anybody. I kind of thought so too. And he ended up failing the Air Force's version of the SATs. He had shown up prepared to cheat, but they gave different tests to everybody. Now, you only need a 36 out of 100 to pass, and David got a 22. Now, after that, he got a letter from his school saying that if his grades did not drastically improve in his next year of school, which was his senior year, he wasn't going to graduate. Now, the night that he found this out, he went to the mirror, looked at himself, and he did not like what he saw. He said he was a low-budget thug with no future. He felt disgusted with himself and wanted to punch that guy that he saw in the mirror. But instead of punching himself in the mirror, he started to lecture himself. It was time to get real. He was like, look at you. He's saying this to himself in the mirror. Like, why would the Air Force want you? You stand for nothing. You're an embarrassment. He started shaving and continuing to talk to himself in the mirror. And he was like, you read like a third grader. He was like, you're a joke. You've never tried hard at anything and you have goals. That's hilarious. After he was done shaving his face, he moved on to his scalp, and because he was like desperate for a change. And he was saying to himself, he's like, you know, you don't see people in the military sagging their pants. He was like, it's time to grow up. Now, what had started as just a spontaneous venting session in the mirror turned into a solo intervention. He was telling himself, he's like, you know, no one's coming to save you. It's up to you. Your mommy's not going to save you. Wilmoth's not going to save you, or some other father figure isn't going to come along and save you. Only you can. Now, with this, a new ritual had been born, and for the first time, he was holding himself accountable. And this ritual would help get him through high school and into the Air Force. The ritual was pretty simple. Every night when he shaved, he would look himself in the mirror and he would get real. And then he would set goals and he would write them on a Post-it note and put them up on what he called his accountability mirror. So at first, his goals were to improve his appearance and to start doing all his chores without being asked. And the accountability mirror kept him on point. And he says that he has found it helpful for anybody at any stage in their life. Maybe you've gone through a bad breakup, or you've had some sort of injury or disability, or maybe you're just coming to terms with the fact that you've wasted a lot of your life. That negativity that you're feeling is your internal desire for change. But change doesn't come easy. And the reason that this ritual worked so well for him was because of the tone that he used. It's okay to be a little bit harsh with yourself if it's coming from a place of wanting to be better and a place of brutal honesty. Nobody likes to hear the harsh truth, but at the end of the day, the only thing stopping you is you. Most of us will give up instead of listen to the harsh truth. We'd rather just give up than get real about the true reasons for our limitations. But you can use that negativity, which is real, and turn it into jet fuel. Those odds that are stacked against you can turn into your runway. He says that there's no more time to waste. He says that we all need to get thicker skin in order to improve in life. Now, the morning after his first session with the accountability mirror, he stopped sagging his pants, started tucking in his shirt and wearing a belt. And then when school started, he stopped eating lunch with the cool kids and he ate by himself. He says that the only reason he didn't become just another statistic is because at the last possible second, he got to work. During his last year in high school, all he cared about was working out and studying. He says that he would wake up before dawn and work out, and that he brainwashed himself into craving discomfort. He said if it was raining, he would go run. And sometimes he would wuss out, but he would always have to deal with it in the accountability mirror. But nothing was harder for David than learning. He would study all the time. And when he took the ASVAB, the military test, he failed again. And this time his mother knew that he was serious about the Air Force, so she got him a tutor. And this tutor helped him come up with a system that helped him learn. And he was surprised that all of this ended up, creating in him a real obsession and desire for learning. Over the next 6 months, he went from a 4th grade reading level to that of a senior in high school. And on his 3rd try, he met the minimum standard for the Air Force on his test. He says that living with purpose had changed his life, at least for the short term. In high school, his obsession with working out and studying had overwhelmed him so much that he didn't have any more room in his mind for hate. He says the emotions that had dominated him kind of dissipated. He had very little confidence before and valued everyone else's opinion of him without having considered the mind that had generated that opinion. He said that each insult or dismissive gesture just fueled him even more. And when he graduated high school, he realized that accomplishing things don't come from, having a perfect family or from some God-given talent. It comes from hard work and holding yourself accountable, which creates self-respect. And self-respect is the path forward. He says to be careful though, because when you've gone through something really challenging, that it can feel like you've won a war. But to be careful of that, because our fears and our issues have a way of kind of lying dormant, and they can come back up even worse. Now, when he joined the Air Force, it showed him that he still had some insecurities and he wasn't yet hard of mind. Now, many years later, after his time in the Air Force, he is working as an overnight exterminator. The guys that work the graveyard shift and they go into restaurants and spray for vermin and stuff so that nobody ever sees that kind of stuff. Yeah, he was that guy. Now, when he had joined the military, he was 175 pounds. But by the time his 4 years were up, he had gotten up to 300 pounds. Now, they say that there's always light at the end of the tunnel, but not once your eyes have adjusted to the darkness. David's life had gotten very mundane, and he was kind of just going through the motions in life. He had a job he didn't like, he was in a marriage he didn't like, and he just had accepted that that was his life. Now, when he had been in the Air Force, he had started training for his dream job, the pararescue position. And he had done really well, but he didn't know that there was a 10-week program called water confidence training. Now, David was not comfortable in the water. He had taught himself to swim well enough to get into the Air Force, but he was still extremely uncomfortable. And this 10-week program, he describes it as them just trying to drown you for 10 weeks. But they want to see like how well you perform underwater while under stress. Now, it's the instructor's job to identify weak links and to kind of push those people to the brink to see if they will quit or not. And they did notice that David was struggling. So they would yell and scream at him and really put the pressure on. Now, he doesn't think this anymore, but back then he was like, why are these guys not giving me a fair shot? Now, a few weeks into this, during a med check, they found out that he carried the sickle cell trait. He didn't have sickle cell anemia, the disease, but he did have the trait. And back then they didn't know a lot about it. And they thought that this would increase his risk for cardiac arrest. Now, the Air Force didn't want him like dropping dead during training, so they pulled him out. And David, he made a big to-do that he was so disappointed, but really he was ecstatic. So later that week, the doctors ended up reversing their decision. They said that, that the medical community didn't know a whole lot about this issue. So basically they were gonna just let David decide for himself whether he continued or not. And David basically just told them that, since the doctors don't know a whole lot about this issue, I'm a little uneasy going forward. And so the instructor signed off his paperwork and, cited the sickle cell trait, and he got out of it. And David knew the truth, though. He had quit. Now, back to when he's an exterminator. Now, the morning that he really decided that he was going to change his life started like any other day. He got off of his shift at 7 in the morning, and he stopped at the drive-thru somewhere and got a chocolate milkshake. And then he stopped at 7-Eleven and got a box of Hostess donuts. And when he got home, he turned on the TV, and there was a show on that followed a group of men going through what's called Hell Week in BUDS training, which is the training that the Navy SEALs go through. Now, it really does sound like hell. They have to run these obstacle courses. They have to swim in ice cold surf. They have to run through this wet sand with logs over their heads. I mean, it's just like, I can't even imagine. And usually only about a third of the men make it through Hell Week. And as David is watching this, he's like, I don't remember going through anything like this in my Air Force training. David felt like in all that suffering that these men were going through, there has to be answers that David wanted. These men were all about pride, dignity, and the kind of excellence that only comes from bathing in the fire. When the show ended, he walked to his accountability mirror and looked at himself for the first time in a long time. And he looked at his 300 pounds, and he realized that he had become all the things that the naysayers said he would be. Zero education, no discipline, no future. He says that mediocrity would have been a step up. He said he was at the bottom of the barrel in life, but for the first time, he was aware of it. So he became obsessed with becoming a Navy SEAL. And every day after work, he would call recruiters in his area and all over the country, really, and he would tell them his story. And most of them were not interested. He said that one of the local recruiters sounded interested and told him to come in, but when he did, they saw like how big he was and they just laughed in his face. They thought he was just another wannabe pretender. Finally, he talked to someone local that again sounded interested, and they told him to come in. And he immediately grabbed his keys and went, but he didn't get his hopes up. When he got there, the first thing they have to do is weigh you. In the Navy, for his height, his maximum weight could be 191 pounds. And when they weighed him, he was 297 pounds. Now, the Navy at the time had a program that would allow recruits in the reserves to become active duty. And that's what they were gonna try and do. That's the path that he was gonna take to become a Navy SEAL. But the program was ending that year, which meant that he had to lose over 100 pounds in like 3 months. He would also have to retake the ASVAB test. When he had taken it before, when he passed previously to get into the Air Force, he had done well, but he didn't do so well on the mechanical comprehensions. He'd gotten a 44, and he would need a 50 this time. And he would have to take this test now again in like 5 weeks. So he had to lose all this weight and pass this test. And when he heard all this, he just felt like giving up. And when he got home, he found a VHS tape of the movie Rocky, which was his favorite movie. And he put it in, and he fast forwarded to the scene, the 14th round, the scene where like Rocky is like not giving up. He's continuing to fight this battle that he's not gonna win.
What is keeping him up, Bill? I don't know.
So he watched this, and then afterwards he turned it off and he sat there and kind of thought about his life. He realized that his life had zero drive or passion in it, but he knew if he gave in to these inadequate feelings, that this would dictate the rest of his life. His only choice really was to try to harness these emotions and somehow use them to empower himself. So when he realized this, he immediately got up and he went for a run. At about a quarter mile, he started to feel some pains in his legs and his chest. And he took a little breather, but then he started up again. And again, a little bit into it, he started feeling these pains. But this time he decided to just plow through them, to just keep running. And by the time he had to stop and catch his breath, he had run 4 miles. That's when he realized that most mental and physical limitations are not real, and that he had a habit of giving up. He also knew that this thing that he wanted to accomplish was going to take a lot of mental toughness, and that he was looking at weeks and weeks of just terrible suffering. He would have to push himself to the edge of his mortality. He had to come to grips with the fact that he very well could die. Trouble was, there was no like plan already set out to accomplish something like this. So he had to make one up. So he typically got up at like 4:30 in the morning. He'd have a piece of fruit. Then he would do his stationary bike for a few hours while reading and studying. Then he would go for a swim for like a couple hours. Then he would hit the gym, but bulk was his enemy, which meant he had to do a lot of reps with lower weight. So he would do like hundreds of reps. And then he'd go for another run or another swim or something. And then for dinner, which was his only like real meal, and it was something like, you know, kind of bland boiled chicken with some vegetables, nothing exciting. Then after dinner, he'd hit the bike again, study some more, and then go to bed, get up the next day and do it all again. Now you would think with all this activity, he'd be sleeping really well, but he said he didn't sleep at all. He said that, his stomach growled at night and he had anxiety and couldn't sleep, and he'd dream of complicated ASVAB questions. And then also his wife at the time told him that her and his stepdaughter, her daughter, would not be moving out to San Diego with him if by some chance he actually pulled this off. San Diego is where the Navy SEALs train. Now with all this output and very little input, depression was a natural reoccurrence. And he had to convince himself that all this self-doubt, depression, anxiety were just signals that he was now living a purpose-driven life. He said that he would put on the soundtrack to Rocky and play Going the Distance over and over. And when he got down to about 250 pounds, he started to feel like he may actually be able to do this. And his dream of becoming a Navy SEAL, it could become a reality. Now he still had the ASVAB to take. So the day that he goes to take the test, he did, he breezed through it, of course, until he got to the mechanical comprehension. He finished the test, and you're supposed to leave and then get your results from your recruiter in a couple of days. But David could not wait. He had started to go out to the car, but then he was like, no, I need to know now. So he went back inside and he asked the administrator what he got on his test. And he said, I'm not supposed to tell you that. But when the administrator saw that David started to literally well up, and he was telling him, he's like, everything in my life depends on my score. He's like, please tell me. And I guess the administrator felt that bad for him that he was willing to break the rule. And he looks it up on his computer and he says, oh, you did really well. You did a 65. And David's like, no, that's my overall score. He's like, I need to know what I got on mechanical comprehension. And the minimum he needed to get was 50. And he got 50. And he started screaming in the building, yes. And everyone started looking at him and he was like, oh. And so then he leaves. And as soon as he got in the car, he called his mother, which was the only person, besides his recruiter, that had witnessed this metamorphosis. But it wasn't all happy days because his wife had given him an ultimatum. He had to either abandon the opportunity that he worked so hard for and stay married, or get divorced. And luckily, he chose the SEALs. He chose to get divorced and continue with his dreams because he knew it was going to be the only way to free himself from this mental prison that he had created. He knew that there would be pain in his future now, but there would also be purpose. David goes on to describe Hell Week to us. He says that it is 5.5 days of endless torture with no sleep. And with something like that, you can't really break it down and systematically attack it. Which is why every SEAL that has ever attempted this has always stopped and asked themselves, why am I doing this? And the instructors knew this, which is why in Buds, it's not like normal boot camp where they scream and yell at you. Instead, they approach you like a concerned older brother, and they offer you blankets and warm soup and just comfort that they know that weaker members are going to snap up. They were able to steal the soul, so to speak, of these men simply because these men could not answer that one simple question of why? Why am I doing this to myself? So Hell Week is a mind game, and the instructors use their suffering to pick and peel away the layers of their minds, not to find the fittest athletes, but to find the strongest minds. And that's something that the people who quit don't understand. David says that, really all life is a game. Whenever we get swept up in life's dramas, big or small, we're usually forgetting that everything is temporary, even this pain that we're going through. He says that those who quit felt like they were on a treadmill that would never end, but that was an illusion that they fell for. By this time, David had developed a real hate for his instructors, and he was tired of them trying to get in his head and burrow into his mind, and he decided that he wanted to flip that. He wanted to own real estate in their head. And so instead of just trying to get through their tasks, that he was going to go above and beyond, and he was going to do so good on these tests that when his instructors went home for the night, because they got to go home for the night and sleep in a comfortable bed and be with their families, that he wanted them still thinking about him. And he calls this taking souls. He says that this taking souls is a way to tap into your reserve power and to find a second wind. And this is just something going on inside yourself. He says that he's not suggesting that you try to crush someone else or dominate someone's spirit, that the other person, your competition or whatever, doesn't even need to know that you're playing this game. He says that you can use this tactic for when you need to be at your best. Now, he says before you can take someone else's soul, you need to deal with your own demons. And part of that means that you need to be able to answer the question of why and have your answer already memorized when that time that you know is going to come up, when you feel like quitting and you ask yourself, why am I doing this? To have your answer already rehearsed and ready will help you ignore the part of your mind that wants to quit. Knowing why you're in the fight will help you stay in the fight. He says to smile at your pain, and you'll be able to feel it fade away for a second or two. And then you can string those seconds together to help you last longer than your opponent thinks you can. And this may be enough to help you get a second wind. Once you have your second wind, it'll be easier for you to break down your opponent and snatch their soul. Now, after Hell Week, you're given a week or two to heal and rest. But after that is underwater knot tying drills. Now remember, David has a fear of the water. It's better now, but it's still with him. But while he was under the water, he realized for the first time that his entire life had been the ultimate training ground. All the stuff he had endured made him who he needed to be to get through this moment that he was in right now, under the water, trying to do these knot tying things. All these things that had happened to him had helped callous his mind so that he was mentally strong enough to do these drills under the water. And he passed his drills, and he finally felt like he was a good enough waterman to be in the Navy SEALs. He says that leaning on your calloused mind and remembering everything that you've been through in life can help correct a negative brain loop, and it will help you bypass those 1 second impulses to quit. He says that when you leverage your calloused mind, that this can help you push through your limits and help you realize that, this pain that you're going through is just part of the process to get what you want. And this will also engage your sympathetic nervous system. This is your fight or flight reflex. It's the part of you that's driving the bus when you're under major stress. He says that if you can manage those moments of pain and self-doubt that come with maximum effort by remembering the things that you have been through, that you'll be in a better position to choose fight over flight. He says that you need to fight even harder at those moments when you feel like quitting, because this is what's going to callous your mind. Now, he got through Hell Week, and after that, they send all the people to get checked out by the doctors, and they found that he had a fractured kneecap. And, you know, he had been suffering through this the whole time and hadn't said anything. This meant that even though he had gotten through Hell Week, he hadn't graduated yet. So he was gonna be sent home to heal. And this sucked, because this means he'd have to go through the whole thing again. So his future was very uncertain. So on his way home to Chicago, he was thinking a lot about this, and he was, you know, wasn't sure, did he still want to be a SEAL anymore? Had he, you know, proven to himself that he could be self-disciplined and callous his mind and do all these things? Did he learn everything about himself that he wanted to? Did he really have anything left to prove? He thought maybe he could be a firefighter. That was a pretty, you know, badass job. So he checked in with his accountability mirror, and he looked at himself and he said, you know, is that really what you want, to not be a SEAL? That whole summer while he was rehabbing his knee, he needed to make a decision, because the Navy needed to know whether he was coming back or not. Now, David couldn't help but feel like he was somehow put on this earth to suffer. He was tired of having to prove himself all the time, but he knew that if he gave up, that would haunt him for the rest of his life. That he would be in this kind of purgatory where that memory would just always eat at him. He says that there's no shame in getting knocked out of the fight, but to quit is where the shame lies. And so he thought, well, if I am born to suffer, I might as well suffer. Put myself through it again. Now, this was actually, I think, the second time that he had been through buds. I know he did it a total of 3 times. And I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly what happened, why he had to do it this 3rd time. But he was told, when he finally told them that, you know, I'm gonna come back, he was told that this would be his last chance, that he wouldn't be allowed to try again after this. This was it. He hung up the phone with his recruiter, and then immediately after that, he got a phone call from his ex-wife. Now, him and his ex-wife, you know, they had seen each other a few times here and there, and as some people do, they kind of fell into old habits and went to each other for comfort, for whatever, and they had been together a few more times. So anyway, his ex-wife is like, I need to come over and I need to talk to you right away. We know where this is going, right? So she comes over and she's all excited and happy, and she's pregnant. But before she had come over, he was like, okay, good, yeah, come on over, I need to talk to you anyway. And he was like about to break up with her, like, in other words, like say, we can't do this like backsliding thing anymore. He's like, we'll never work out anyway, so we need to just knock it off. But then she comes to the house and she's all happy, and he feels like crap about this because he got this woman pregnant that he doesn't even love, and now he's trying to do buds, and oh my god, it's just very overwhelming. And now it wasn't just his dream of becoming a SEAL. If he failed this time, he was bringing a child along with him. He says that it seemed like the harder he tried in life, the harder his life got. But he knew that he could, you know, take on any challenge. He knew that he needed to develop an armored mind, a mind so calloused and strong that it becomes bulletproof. But to get this strong of a mind, you're gonna need to go over your insecurities and your character flaws. Most of us just sweep these things under the rug, ignore them. But then when problems come up, you know, they come back out from under the rug and you can't hide them. And these things will influence the decisions that you make. He said that even though he had reached a point in his life where other people's opinions of him didn't matter, he still hadn't accepted himself. He says that everyone needs to go back through their past and make peace with those incidences where you may have taken the easy way out. Pinpointing your negative influences and seeing them as weak spots in your character. Then you can use those incidences to fuel yourself to become a better person. Now for David, this meant not running from his dad anymore and accepting the fact that his dad was a part of him and had influenced David's character. Now when he showed up to Bud's for the third time, he had decided that he was gonna kind of keep to himself because he needed all of his energy and focus to get through these next 6 months. His knee had healed, but it was still bothering him. Now he got through another hell week and his knee was intact, but he had multiple shin fractures, you know, like the little slivery ones. And when he moved his ankle, it sent just shearing pain up his shins. Now this isn't good because in Bud's training, you run 60 miles a week. Now this was very bad because David had now remarried his ex-wife who he had gotten pregnant, and everything was riding on him graduating. This was it. This is his last chance. Him, his pregnant wife, his stepdaughter, they all lived like 20 miles away from where he did his training in this little studio apartment. And he had financed a car to get them out there and was now in debt, and just all the pressure, like he had to graduate, he had to. And he wondered, like, how much can one person take? So he came up with a plan. He would tape up his feet, ankles, and shins with duct tape. It helped a little bit. I mean, it was still torture to run, but when he moved his ankle, it was a little bit better. So on his first run, after taping up his legs, he said it was excruciating. But about 40 minutes into this run, for some reason, the pain subsided. Now the pain would kind of come and go throughout the day, but you know, he stuck to it. He'd come in early every morning so that no one would see him taping up his legs, and he would just talk himself through the day. And he did this day after day. Now for the water exercises, which were painful because you gotta, you know, tread water and stuff, the way that your legs move, I can imagine how painful that would be. He couldn't tape up his legs for that. So he just had to suck it up. Now he finally graduates and everyone's happy and all his friends go out to celebrate, but he was actually kind of sad. He was actually gonna kind of miss this pain that he had been through. You know, when he had joined the SEALs, it was because he was looking for something that was gonna either destroy him completely or make him unbreakable. And Bud's had provided that. But now it was gonna be up to him to find challenges to like keep this mind calloused and to keep him going. And he found this next challenge in a race called the San Diego One Day. And this is where you run 100 miles in 24 hours. And David thought that should be pretty easy for a seal. He did the calculations and you only have to run a mile every 15 minutes. And heck, I mean, if it got really bad, he could walk that. Problem is, it had been a year since he'd left Buds and he had not done any training at all. Now at this point, he had divorced his wife for the second time, and a few months before this race, he had married someone new, someone named Kate. Now he had only heard about this race 3 days before he was supposed to run it, which meant no training. He did 0 training. And so not long into this race, the pain became real. And he started to ask himself that question again, why? Why am I doing this to myself? Now this time it wasn't really about proving anything to himself or anybody else. He wanted to raise money for a nonprofit called the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. Or at least that's what he told himself. At about the 70-mile point in this race, the pain became real and he needed to take a break. So he sits down and takes off his shoes and socks, and his feet are all blistered and bloody. And his wife, Kate, goes off to get him some medical tape or something to help him. And while she was gone, he pissed and crapped himself. And it was all bloody, which means there was some sort of kidney issue going on. Now he got back up on his feet and he started trying to run again. And someone told him, his coach or Kate or someone told him that, you know, at the pace he was going, he wasn't going to finish the race. And that's when he realized that this race that he was doing, the suffering he was putting himself through, it wasn't about the foundation. I mean, it was to a point, but really it was about him. It was about how much he was willing to suffer, how much he could take, and how much more he could give. And if he was gonna get through this, he was gonna have to get real with himself. He was gonna have to make it personal. So he reflected on his 3 hell weeks that he had been through. There had been no trophy. It was an all-out war of himself against himself. And that's where he found himself again on this racetrack, asking himself, why? Why am I putting myself through this? And then out loud he says, because I am one bad motherfucker. Now after this, he felt this surge of energy. He realized that being in the fight was a miracle in and of itself, and that God had nothing to do with that. He was in this fight because of himself. He should have quit hours ago, but he was the reason that he still had a chance to finish. And this wasn't the first time that he had taken on a seemingly impossible task. He kept digging into his past and into what he calls his imaginary cookie jar. He remembered as a kid, no matter how poor they were, his mother always kept a cookie jar. And he remembered, you know, being so excited as a little kid to reach his fist in and wonder what was gonna come out, and then just feeling this gratitude of this little cookie. And he used this concept as a way to create a new kind of cookie jar. And inside this new cookie jar were all his past victories, like the time that he had to study 3 times harder than anybody else just to graduate high school, and then overcoming his fear of water, and graduating Buds, and losing 100 pounds, and passing the ASVAB twice. These were all cookies in his cookie jar. And he wouldn't just remember these moments, he would really tap into the feelings that he had experienced. And this would help him, you know, get the energy to continue on, to not quit. And the pain faded just enough so that he could pick up the pace. And from then on, he would use this cookie jar as a way to motivate himself and push him again through those moments when he wanted to quit. It was a reminder of who he truly was and what he was capable of. He says that we all have a cookie jar inside of us, that most of us can think of at least 1 or 2 times when we were able to accomplish something, to get through something, to overcome odds and taste success. So David used his cookie jar to finish this race. And by the time he was done, he needed to go to the ER, but he wouldn't go because he felt like he had earned this pain, that this was his trophy, that if he went to the hospital, they'd give him pain meds and he wouldn't be able to feel the pain. And he wanted to feel the pain because he felt that he had just accomplished something very significant, more significant than becoming a SEAL and more challenging than his deployment to Iraq. And that was because he was pretty sure that he had just accomplished something that nobody has ever accomplished. He just ran 100 miles in 24 hours with no training. And this made him realize that there was a whole new level of performance that he had not been to yet, that the human body can withstand a hell of a lot more than we think it can, and that begins and ends in the mind. And then he had another thought. If I could run 100 miles with no training, what could I do with a little preparation? Now, after this, he ran several more races, including the Las Vegas Marathon almost immediately after the San Diego One Day, and then also another race called the Hurt 100 in Hawaii. It also became clear to him that most of us are leaving a lot on the table, that we continually settle for less than we're capable of. And that this ripples out into not just, from the individual to the family, but also into the whole of society. So by running all these races, he realized something that he calls the 40% rule. And he feels that most people are only operating at 40%, that we think we just don't have any more to give once we've reached 40% of our capacity. But once you know that, it's simply a matter of stretching your pain tolerance. And once you hit 40%, you can then reach 60% and then 80% and beyond without giving up. And this 40% rule can be applied to anything: physical, mental, business, personal. His next challenge was a race called Badwater, and it took place in Death Valley. And it is the most brutal race on the planet. Now, this race would take a lot of preparation. Now, when some of his colleagues found out what he was doing, they scoffed at him, made fun of him, especially after they found out that he was still healing up from the Hurt 100. Now, most of us are motivated as hell until someone reminds us of our own limitations, all the people that, didn't accomplish this thing before you, the danger, the downsides. And, sometimes this advice is from a well-meaning place, but if you listen and you take it to heart, you're gonna be letting these people talk you out of your dreams. You've gotta come up with some kind of a system that reminds you of who you are when you're at your best. We are only capable of living up to what we imagine we are capable of living up to. So you have to prepare yourself, because our minds are our most powerful weapon. And you must be willing to go to war with yourself in order to create a new identity. Now, David ended up coming in 5th in this race, this Badwater in Death Valley, which is pretty good for the world's most difficult race. But he also knew that there was more to accomplish, and that in life there is no finish line. Now, the next race after that was called the Ultraman, where you swam, ran the perimeter of the big island of Hawaii. And this time he was again raising money for the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. Now, he came in 2nd in this race, but he would have come in 1st, except that he didn't evaluate the race strategically. And he didn't put in any backstops, which are indicators to let you know when you've gone off course. Now after this, David became one of the top recruiters, and he would go all over the country speaking at schools and all the while participating in ultramarathons. And everywhere he went, he would get the same question. People would ask him, what does it take to reach my full potential? And this is what he would say. He would say that, you know, our culture is like hooked on the quick fix, the life hacks, the algorithm that's going to, you know, give you the maximum profit with as little amount of effort as possible. And maybe this will get you some of the trappings of success, but it won't callous your mind and it won't lead to self-mastery. He says if you want to master your mind, you're going to have to become addicted to hard work. He says that regardless of how much passion or drive or talent that you have, it's only going to get you so far without a proper work ethic. He says that the number one excuse that he hears from people who say that they can't work out or can't reach their goals is because they don't have the time. And, you know, none of us want to lose sleep, and we need to spend time with our family. We have work obligations. So if this is the situation that you're in, that means that you have to master the morning. He says that once you've figured out where you can maximize your time, which is usually in the earliest morning hours, don't forget to put in backstops. Something that's going to let you know when one task has bled into another. He says to use your smartphone for productivity hacks, not clickbait. So set calendar reminders, have alarms set. Now the next race that he was going to do was a bicycle race across the country. But that capsized. He says that one day it just felt like he was some kind of malfunctioning appliance. He said that his whole life he had a pretty normal resting heart rate, but all of a sudden it was jumping up, and any little physical task he did would send it racing and pounding. So he had to go to the doctors, and they gave him an echocardiogram. So he found out that he had been born with a hole in his heart, and he realized for the first time in his life, he was actually pretty damn lucky. He had done all these things, all these physical things with a hole in his heart. They wouldn't even allowed him to enter the military if they had known. So he was going to have surgery. Now, when he had the surgery, it sounds like the doctor kind of messed up, because he said he was awake, that the anesthesia didn't take, and that he was kind of in and out of consciousness. Sounds like a freaking nightmare to me, like one of my worst fears ever. And then the surgery didn't even take. The patch didn't cover the entire hole. So he went back to having all the same symptoms. Now, the Navy found out about this and found out he was going to have a second surgery. And they suggested and kind of wanted him to slow down and maybe just retire. But as he was being wheeled down the hallway for this second surgery, he asked himself, he's like, have I done everything I wanted to do? Would I be satisfied being retired? And his answer was, of course, as you can guess, it was no. He had his second surgery, he recovered fully, and for the first time in his life, he had a full functioning heart. He tells us here that a lot of people think that once you've reached a certain amount of success in your life, that you can kind of kick back and take it easy, and that you've made it in life. But David said this is not so, that you must always be looking for more challenges. Greatness isn't something that you just meet once and it's with you forever. He says that evaporates in a flash. He says that if you want to become uncommon amongst the uncommon, that this is going to require sustaining greatness for long periods of time. It's going to require constant output. Now, this may sound appealing at first, but it's going to require everything you have to give and some. And this isn't for everyone, and that's okay. He says that if you truly want to be an overachiever, then you're probably going to need to surround yourself with other overachievers. And then what are you going to do to stand out from those people? He says it's easy to be a big fish in a small pond, but it's not easy to be a wolf among wolves. This means, not just getting into the best business school, but graduating first in your class. It means not just getting through buds and becoming a Navy SEAL, but also then going to Army Ranger School and graduating at the top of that class. And then go out and run Badwater. He says that, as you accomplish things in life, there's going to be complacency gathering around you from your coworkers and just people in your life who have also accomplished things, but that you can't let that get to you. You must continue to put obstacles in front of yourself if you want to stand alone. Now, in 2012, he wanted to break the world record for most pull-ups in a 24-hour period, which was 4,020. And again, he wanted to raise money for the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. And he knew that this sounded impossible until he broke it down. And he realized that he would have to knock out 6 pull-ups every minute on the minute. And if he could do that for 24 hours straight, he would shatter the world record. Now, when the day of the challenge came, he noticed that the bar that he was going to be using had a little more give than the one that he had been practicing on. So this changed a lot. And when he hit like 2,500 pull-ups, he could barely raise his hands over his head to reach the bar. So that was the end of that. But David sees failure as just a step towards success. So he tried again. And then when he was only 800 pull-ups away, his hands literally began to fall apart. The skin tore down to his dermis, which is where our nerves are, which is so painful. And he ended up having to go to the ER. And while he was at the ER with his mother looked over at him and said, she goes, "Well, I know one thing's for sure, you're gonna do this again," which was exactly what he needed to hear. We need to surround ourselves with people who will tell us what we need to hear, not what we want to hear. People who won't speak to our desire for comfort. People who would never say, "Well, I guess it's just not meant to be." So he went back and looked over his failures and he wrote them down. You can't let one failure derail your entire mission. He says in life, you're not always going to be lucky, and that's just the way it is. Life isn't going to bend to your every whim. You need to let go of the fact that just because you can imagine a possibility for yourself, that you somehow are entitled to it. You have to cut loose this entitled mind. Don't focus on what you think you deserve, but take aim at what you're willing to earn. On his 3rd attempt, he had the gym play Going the Distance from Rocky on a loop. And he says something inside of him just clicked. He said at around 3,000 pull-ups, he started to hit a wall and his hand started to fall apart again. And there were a lot of people watching. It takes a lot of courage to put yourself on the line in public and to continue to reach for a dream that feels like it's slipping away. You must ignore everything that everyone says and just focus on your aim. At 3 a.m. in the morning, he hit the record and everyone cheered and celebrated. He had lifted an equivalent of 3 space shuttles. But was he in the mood to celebrate? No. All he could think about was what his next challenge was going to be, because he knew his refrigerator wasn't full, and it never will be. After 20 years in the military, he was in his final year of service. But one night, he went out to dinner with his mother, and they had to call an ambulance for him because all of a sudden he was like seeing in triples and feeling woozy. But the doctors said he just needed some rest. But his health continued to decline, and he had a bunch of tests, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. He said that he felt like the doctors thought he was just some kind of hypochondriac or something. One morning, it got so bad, he called out sick and didn't go into work. And he was lying in bed and just kind of thinking about his life. And he realized he had never really taken time to appreciate his life, the things he had accomplished, and the life that he had built for himself. And then he kind of reached back behind his head and he felt a knot at the base of his skull. And he also felt a couple knots above his hip flexors. And he was thinking, he's like, could these be related to his health issues? His whole life, he had been obsessed with power, and he had never really taken into account his range of motion or flexibility. And so he immediately took up a stretching regimen. So after several months of continuous stretching, he felt the knots started to subside, and his overall health started to improve as well. And so from then on, he has done 6 hours of stretching every day. He ended up retiring from the military in 2015, but it was a bittersweet retirement because, you know, the military had been such a big part of his life and his identity. He says that most of us live a life defined by our own made-up limitations out of a desire to be comfortable and to stay in our little box where it's safe. But these limits that we accept become a lens through which others see us. But for some, these limits start to feel like bondage. Most people who get all jazzed up and feel motivated will quit at some point. But the few that remain, they'll encounter even more pain and even more doubt, usually courtesy of those who say they're our biggest fans. But it's not just the external voices that will wear us down. It's our conversations that we have with ourselves, which are the most important conversations we'll ever have, that are going to influence us, whether they're good or bad. Self-doubt is a natural reaction to anything we do that's going to try and better ourselves. You can't stop it from coming up in your mind, but you can neutralize it by asking, what if? What if is the power and the permission to face down your worst demons, your worst fears, your past, and accept them as part of your history. He says that he hopes that this book will help you come to terms with your own self-made limits. He says there will be pain, but if you can accept it, it will callous your mind to the point where not even pain can hurt you. But there is a catch to living this way, and that's that it never ends. So yeah, that is the story of David Goggins and his remarkable life, and it shows us the path where we can live our own remarkable life, which I really like, because who wants to just read about the accomplishments of better men or women and people? So yeah, if you're looking to become more self-disciplined, which is definitely something I feel like I'm always trying to work on, this book is great for that. It's a book that's going to show you your own BS that you pull on yourself. The exercises at the end, I think, are invaluable. I think that if you're really going to take this book to heart and really try to use it to better your life, you have to do the exercises at the end, which is why I didn't go over them, because I want you to get this book and do them yourself. I would strongly, strongly encourage everyone to get this book and read it Because even if you don't think that you have some sort of issue that you need to deal with, or you're not particularly going through hard times, you're going to at some point. At some point in your life, we're going to have struggles. And this book is really going to prepare you on how to deal with that, how to callous your mind, get yourself in the kind of mental state that is prepared to take on challenges. And it can be any kind of challenge. Mental issues, depression, something in your career, something financial. If you're just having a hard time dealing with the world and the state that it is, this is the book. I really think that this book can be useful to anybody for almost any reason. So yeah, that is my summary of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. Again, my summaries do absolutely no justice to this book. Please get it, use it. It's kind of funny, like this book, as I'm trying to relay it to you, is kind of weird because like I was actually really struggling making this video for some reason. I don't know why. Like when I was taking in the information, reading it, it was clicking, but for some reason to try to relay it to someone else was, I don't know if something's going on today, but I was very distracted. My camera was giving me problems, and it was a real struggle to get through filming this video. And I was feeling like giving up, like this wasn't gonna work out. I'm never gonna get this video done. And as I'm relaying the information, it's information that I need to hear just to get this video done. And it's kind of trippy. This is just a great book to have in your library, and it's definitely something that I will reach for when I just need some encouragement, and I hope you will too. If you liked this video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up. It lets me know you care, and it helps me decide what kind of videos to make. Make sure and subscribe and hit the notifications bell so that you'll know when I upload new videos, and you won't miss the next awesome book that I'm gonna read and tell you all about while I do my makeup. And I will see you in the next one. Bye! Of the challenges and exercises that he has and the boys would have to go to bed and then still, and he hit the ground at 100 miles, and he hit, get real about the actual limitations. He didn't have sickle cell, and he had to come to the grip. And you'll be able to feel it fade away. And this will also engage your sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic. This is your fight or flight reset. Important to choose to continue to fight when you want to quit the hardest. And that's where he found himself, that you must always be looking for more challenges and more ways to challenge yourself. In 2012, he wanted to break the world's pull-up record. People who won't, but these limits that we create become a lens for which others and ourselves